This episode, and others like it, are brought to you by the generous support of my patrons on Patreon. If you'd like to help support this channel, join our patrons-only Discord, and get early access to every video, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/secondthought. To a non-American, driving down roads lined with American flags, past people dressed like this, past fields where, hand on heart, Americans sing along to the national anthem for even the most forgotten Little League game, and past bars where a USA chant is on a hair trigger is all very strange. Every Ford commercial in this country is about how the US is sick as hell. Every bald eagle is swole. Every beer is a gun. And a kid just pledging allegiance to the flag is a heartwarming story on national television. In no other country in the world is there such a widespread emotional attachment to the symbols of a bureaucratic government structure. It's incredibly strange, but I get that a lot of patriotism is just having fun. For a lot of people, it's like wearing your team's colors to a game. It's a good time. The problem is that that's not all that patriotism, or its defense, is. Almost every week, I get an email calling me a traitor or anti-American scum. For some reason, in this country, good faith criticism almost always triggers this knee-jerk reaction that the person raising their concerns, or more often just advocating for their own self-determination, hates America. Let's take an example. Here's an email I got from someone who probably genuinely believes they love their country, and thinks what they're doing is a justified defense. And you know what? Let's give this viewer the benefit of the doubt. If you wholeheartedly believe that someone hates you and or the place you call home, it's not entirely unreasonable to get angry with them like this. But here's the thing. If you really want to label yourself patriotic, this kind of approach is completely counterproductive. Think about it for a second. If you care about your country, you should be among the first to call out problems when you see them. If you love your country and your fellow Americans, you should want to fix those problems, not blindly defend them. This kind of behavior isn't patriotic. It's ignorant. All those quote-unquote traitors are doing is bringing attention to problems that all of us should want to solve. There's nothing un-American about caring for your unhoused neighbors. Nothing unreasonable about pointing out that our medical bills are the highest in the world and that we should work to lower them. It's not being a traitor to suggest that the United States is not living up to the standards it claims to set for itself and the rest of the world. And it's not un-American to identify that the root of the problem runs pretty deep. I think we can all agree that these problems exist. That's not the issue most of the time. The issue comes when someone suggests that the cause of these problems is structural and therefore requires structural change. A lot of these problems, these things that we can all agree are hurting people both in this country and beyond our borders, aren't just a matter of bad people. They are an integral part of the American experiment, going all the way back to the country's founding and the principles our economy is built on. And it's okay to point that out. The Constitution allows for amendments because it was written with the idea that things would change. And what was accepted by the Founding Fathers doesn't have to be accepted by us today. Just because the Constitution is still around doesn't mean that everything in it is good or works. It just means that it's a document that effectively protected its own existence. Fun fact, many of the Founding Fathers, who are always portrayed as dusty old dudes in History Channel documentaries, were actually in their 20s. You wouldn't want a constitution written by a bunch of frat boys to be immortal and unchangeable, would you? Okay, so hopefully I've made it clear that a better conception of patriotism would require a willingness to soberly assess and tackle our country's problems. With that, we've already broached the topic of what's called uncritical patriotism. But there's no reason we can't let go of patriotism entirely. And this video will make that claim for American patriotism specifically. Patriotism, especially here in the States, doesn't actually build genuine solidarity like the glorified image of patriotism might have you believe. It's not really about standing together in any meaningful way. Instead, patriotism in this country actually reinforces divisions along aesthetic lines convenient to those in power. It encourages exceptionalist thinking and xenophobia, with consequences neither good for the world nor for average Americans. And having been injected with anti-communist rhetoric during the Cold War, patriotism has become this loyalty to the myth that the US is the sole bastion of goodness and freedom in the world, which makes any claim that something might be wrong, unjust, and possible for us to change seem like a declaration of war. Let's talk about that. Patriotism is always promoted as solidarity. Behind the symbols, the territory, the language, the culture, whatever patriotism attaches itself to, its main draw isn't we all like these three colors, it's community and solidarity with other people. This idea that even people you've never met and will never meet are there for you and you're there for them. It's a nice idea, and said in this abstract way, there's nothing inherently wrong with it. But there are a couple problems with the reality of patriotic quote-unquote solidarity. For starters, it obviously doesn't extend to everyone, and patriotic solidarity specifically is weaponized for conservative ends. The political scientist Benedict Anderson puts it very clearly when he says, "Regardless of the actual inequality and exploitation that may prevail in each, the nation is always conceived as a deep, horizontal comradeship." And as you might expect, this is something that those who benefit from inequality and exploitation can use. If enough people can be convinced that unity along the lines of nationality is more important than pretty much anything else, then calling attention to all the internal conflicts within a society can be swept under the rug as dividing us. For patriots, unity is what makes the country proud and strong, so it's better not to point out how that unity is held together by one group oppressing another, or we might risk losing that unity. But obviously, not calling out oppression benefits the people doing the oppressing. Through the idea of the nation, people come to identify with their exploiters in a way that justifies their continued existence. For example, some people are proud that their country has more billionaires than other countries. For some reason, being born within a couple thousand miles of one another and within the same border gets people to identify with those who have hoarded more wealth than we can even understand. Most people share almost nothing in common with their country's billionaires, and almost everything with the average person in another country. But that feeling of pride gets them to disregard one set of differences and makes the smaller differences with foreigners seem a lot bigger. As a result, the exploitation that is necessary for billionaires to exist seems less important when we're told it's in the service of something we share, the greatness of America. Even though the greatness of America does almost nothing to make your life better, but billionaires getting tax cuts and skirting labor laws definitely makes it worse. This is something that's really apparent when conservative patriots talk about the experience of Black Americans, for example. In a recent interview, the conservative economist Glenn Loury said, quote, "Look, here we are. We are African Americans, but we are Americans first. We are not African in any way that's meaningful. Yes, our ancestors may have been enslaved, but they were also emancipated. We are literally the richest and most powerful people of African descent on the entire planet. We have 10 times the income on average of the typical Nigerian. There's an enormous black middle class and black billionaires." The translation: pride in the existence of the possibility of black success justifies the continued exploitation of the vast majority of black people. If you are black, you should be grateful to have the incredibly unlikely chance to have more money than you know what to do with, instead of complaining that this system is rigged against you, and in a similar way, is rigged against other black people in another country. By implying that Black Americans should prioritize their national affiliation rather than their class and race, Loury is subtly implying that Black Americans should not be so critical of a system with a legal and policing system that targets and kills them disproportionately, that exploits their racial otherness to deny them a comfortable life unless they assimilate to the dominant white norms of behavior, and that Black Americans should distance themselves from people living in another country whose poverty can be explained, at least in part, by the same phenomenon of slavery that is at the root of the present inequality between black and white people in America. The fact that other people have it worse turns rightful indignation into pride for those who can be convinced, and makes those who stay rightfully indignant look ungrateful. Loury defends capitalism, and he knows that capitalism requires exploitation. He's just hoping that by calling attention to your nationality, you'll accept how exploited you are because someone else has it worse. A non-patriotic approach might look at the inequality between Black Americans and Black Nigerians and find that the plunder of Africa through colonialism and slavery caused both the present inequality between white and Black Americans and the inequality between Americans and Nigerians, and from there can ask what should be done to rectify this injustice, and what structures are keeping it in place. By contrast, a patriotic approach to these facts gets people to think that the best we can do is protect what we have. Never try to get more. Never question the nature of the system as it exists today, and never hope to achieve justice, especially for those not part of the patriotic community. At the end of the day, the existence of black billionaires still relies on the exploitation of black people, and is still supported by the systemic discrimination of black people. But drown all that in a little American pride, and it goes down a lot smoother. To recap, patriotism replaces solidarity among people who suffer under the same structures of injustice, in this case international racial capitalism, and replaces it with solidarity between those who do the oppressing and those who are oppressed. Let me seriously ask, what is the point of patriotism? Why choose to believe you're better or even meaningfully different from someone on the other side of the world? Your material concerns are the same. You have bills, you want to take care of your family, you want the freedom to pursue your own happiness. There is far more in common between you than the differences created by a borderline decided hundreds of years ago in random wars and brutal, bloody conquests. The world is not going to be made better as long as the oppressed fight one another for the crumbs dropped from the table of the oppressors. Moving on. For patriotism to work, you need to have a general idea about what it is you're patriotic about. And this is one of the great debates of American politics. What is the soul of America? Generally, a patriot might answer with something like freedom, opportunity, or justice. And if that's you, those are good things to defend and give value to. I'm right there with you, 100%. But there is no reason that you need to attach those things exclusively to the US. Absolutely defend freedom. Absolutely defend justice. Absolutely defend opportunity. But why connect those things to this vague idea you'll have to defend too? Because both historically and presently, while American political discourse likes to promote these ideas of freedom and justice, American political action and the structures of American politics and the American economy actively work against these things. I'm not going to rehash all of American history to make this point. Suffice it to say that slavery, manifest destiny, meaning the still ongoing genocide of Native Americans, and the various imperial wars the US has led, are all cases where the nation's first goal and economic motivation was suppressing the freedom of people categorized as others, and therefore outside the mythologized community. Defending something like freedom within the context of American patriotism has rarely ever meant actually defending freedom. And it's almost always meant taking it away from those who were in the way of a greater project of wealth accumulation. And I can already hear a commenter saying something like, if the US can be blamed for, say, Jim Crow, then it should also be praised for the civil rights movement. But I'd argue you'd have a really difficult time defining something as America and showing it was on the right side of the civil rights movement. For example, if America to you means the community of people living in this country, the majority opinion of the US was decidedly against the civil rights movement, with the press calling its leaders like MLK and Malcolm X un-American. If America means the government of this country, then it too was decidedly against the civil rights movement, sending police to crush the protests. If America means the country's founding documents, civil rights for black people is clearly not what America is all about. When it comes to justice, freedom, and opportunity, these things were not achieved for millions of people by being patriotic, but by working outside of and rejecting what was considered American at their time. If you understand why flying the Confederate flag sends a specific message, regardless of the values people who fly it say it represents, consider how the same things might apply to the American flag. Retroactively, historical moments like the civil rights movement have been folded into the America that one should be patriotic for. But that doesn't mean that freedom isn't still being suppressed in the name of patriotism. When movements for self-determination like BLM and the decolonization movement make waves, for example, the knee-jerk reaction against people wanting a more free society, free for everyone to build their own lives without the threat and exercise of state violence against them, is time and time again patriotism. BLM and decolonization proponents are ruthlessly attacked by an angry mob mobilized not against their ideas, but by the "They Hate America" slogan repeated endlessly on conservative media. These movements are indeed contesting the hegemonic idea of what America is right now, but they are clearly defending the values American patriots claim to hold: freedom, justice, and opportunity. Finally, we should talk about how anti-communism is a core pillar of American patriotism. Part of the reactionary nature of American patriotism can be explained by the long-standing myths that have surrounded the relationship of the American public with socialist ideas. When movements for justice are called anti-American, they're usually also called Marxist or communist pejoratively. And when movements like the civil rights movement are repackaged into the American patriotic canon, their radicality and the socialist politics of their leaders like MLK are either outright erased or hotly contested, with some even going so far as to say that if MLK was alive today, he'd be a conservative Republican. Two myths inform this idea. One, that America is ontologically capitalist, meaning that it is in the nature of the United States to be a capitalist nation, rather than the more realistic idea that economic systems come and go, and just because the US has a capitalist economy right now doesn't mean it will forever. And 2, that capitalism is the only thing that works, and socialism always fails. The second claim is clearly a myth because this isn't what I would call working, and historically, American foreign policy has been intent on crushing socialism rather than letting it fail on its own like the pro-capitalist claim it will. In this country, anti-communism has been something we've nurtured for a long time, with things like the Immigration Acts of 1903 and 1918, which enabled the government to deport foreign-born anarchists, communists, and labor organizers, the successive Red Scares during the 20th century, and obviously the Cold War. The notion that anti-communism is patriotic is a really well-established one. The result is that when combined with capitalist realism, this idea of a resolutely anti-communist, ontologically capitalist America makes it seem like there is no alternative, and anyone proposing anything that would clearly improve your life, if they're doing so by challenging a capitalist norm, might be ruining the only thing that we know works, even if it clearly hasn't been working for a long time now. Patriotism, like capitalist realism, really limits our imagination. When people come up with good ideas about how to change things for the better, if we keep calling them un-American and shooting them down right away, this country won't get any better for the vast majority of the people living both inside and outside its borders. And just to be clear before the video ends, this whole video isn't me coming after you for being American, if you are. There's obviously nothing wrong with just being from here. All I'm saying is that it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to be proud of this vague mythology that is at best a mixed bag. And insisting that everyone here be proud of it only makes it harder for us to change the parts we all agree are bad. Constantly thinking in terms of nation-states like this is really blinding us to the fact that we have a lot more to gain by building solidarity everywhere, all over the world, not just within our own arbitrary borders. Let's let go of patriotism in favor of genuine solidarity. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that my channel is only possible thanks to my patrons on Patreon. As some of you may remember, I used to make general interest science videos. I didn't particularly enjoy it, but it was easy to get sponsors for that kind of content. When I made the switch to political content, something I actually do enjoy, most of my sponsors bailed. It's understandable, not many brands want to associate with anti-capitalist content, but that means I've had to rely more heavily on the generosity of viewers like you. I've got one reliable sponsor left, and it's a little nerve-wracking not to have much predictable income to count on. If you're able to chip in even $1 a month, I would greatly appreciate your support. As a little show of that appreciation, every patron, regardless of donation amount, gets early access to every video, plus access to our patrons-only Discord server. It's a great place to hang out. We've got everything from a recommended reading list, to a book club, to countless other channels to chat, learn, and explore your interests. We've built a great little community, and we'd love for you to be part of it. So if you'd like to help keep this channel afloat and get some great perks while you're at it, consider becoming a patron by visiting patreon.com/secondthought. If you enjoyed this video, consider dropping a like. If you hated it, a thumbs down. You can check out my other content by following the links on your screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.